This is Anvisha with Food Ingredients First. I'm here with Dr. Jared Raynes, who's Chief Scientific Officer at Australian biotech Allg. Allg has filed a second patent for a novel process to scale the production of casein micelles, replicating milk protein without animals. It's great to have you with us today, Jared. How does scalable production of recombinant casein micelles impact the food ingredient industry?
Yeah, sure. If you are obviously a dairy company or a food company that's using liquid milk or dried milk as their base ingredient for producing food or other ingredients, 80% of that protein content of those ingredients are casein proteins, and those casein proteins are found in this thing called a casein micelle. So obviously, if you're a food company using these ingredients, casein micelles are extremely important to those companies. And therefore, if we're wanting to use precision fermented caseins, we need to be able to actually assemble those into casein micelles so that these food companies can then replicate the textures and functionalities of the foods that they're already producing. Um, so currently, the formation of nature identical casein micelles has been done really more on the scientific literature side of things, which is where I started working in this area, more than 10 years ago now. Um, but these methods have always been quite difficult to scale. And this is really what our new patent application overcomes. So Algae has come up with a process to form native like casein micelles that is really fast, scalable, and can be slotted into existing dairy factories using their current equipment. This technology, it can also open up totally new product categories. So we can extend this, if you start thinking about, well, let's produce recombinant human casein micelles for infant formula. This product doesn't currently exist, and therefore, we've proven our technology works both on traditional cow or bovine caseins, but also human caseins. And if you think about, scaling this technology, it could have a really big impact, particularly in new product areas like infant formula for human casein proteins.
And what role do micellar structures play in dairy-based products like cheese and cappuccinos?
So most people would have heard the terms the curds and the whey when thinking about cheese making. And these are two simple terms that are used to describe the two major protein fractions found in milk, the caseins or the curds and the whey proteins, which are the soluble proteins and lactose that remains after the coagulation process during cheese making. So in cheese making, we actually take liquid milk and we add the enzyme rennet. And what's interesting about this process is this enzyme rennet, it actually destabilizes the casein micelle, and that's what causes it to clump together and form those curds. And then we have this amazing texture and stretch and all of these things that we love about cheese. And so without a casein micelle, you obviously can't do this process. There are some cheeses that you can make without casein micelles, but it's going to be quite limited. And so they're extremely important in cheese making. And then if we think about our coffee, I used to be a barista. I love coffee. I love, latte art. Again, the casein micelles are extremely important here for stabilizing those micro bubbles that we love in the foam of our coffee. And if we want the foam to last a long time and have really amazing texture, you also need those casein micelles. So really important in both of these areas.
hmm Thanks for that comprehensive answer. And could you tell us if your process could replace traditional dairy proteins in products like yogurt and milk, and what challenges do you foresee with that?
Sure. Algae as a company, we don't see ourselves as replacing traditional dairy, but rather we want to work really closely with the dairy industry to help them bring on new types of products, increase the amount of dairy proteins available for consumers. If you think about the growth of the dairy product category over the coming years, where is the extra milk going to come from to actually even be able to bring on kind of the natural evolution of the increase in dairy products that are needed over time. Where is that milk going to come from? I'm, originally from New Zealand, a really big dairy producer, and they reached peak cow, a number of years ago now, and there's actually been a year-on-year reduction in milk supply in New Zealand and other big dairying countries such as the Netherlands. And so, if you're wanting to just keep up with that increase in demand, the natural demand, 2 to 3%, increases in products, you're going to need precision fermentation to actually be able to bring just to keep up with demand. And so, yes, these proteins, these casein micelles can absolutely help, traditional dairy companies produce their yogurts and things like milk. But how do we actually get there? This is one of the really big questions at the moment. And the challenge with the dairy industry is that it is already so enormous. It's been around, over 100 years. And precision fermentation, whilst it's been around for a while, the current infrastructure still isn't available there to be able to bring on a really large amount of protein that's needed to really help, take a segment or increase the production of dairy proteins for traditional industry. And so this is really the challenge at the moment. Lots of startups have strains ready to go, but the price points of traditional caseins are very low, and the infrastructure to be able to mass produce caseins around the world just isn't there yet. And this is the challenge. How do we bring caseins to market so that you're not just selling a cheese in one or two niche shops, rather you can supply, large supermarket chains. And this is the challenge at the moment, the scaling of this technology.
Hmm. Talk to us more about the technical challenges in scaling the production of recombinant casein micelles and how did Allg overcome them?
Sure. There are multiple challenges to overcome. And really the first one is that you need to be able to produce phosphorylated casein. So caseins are very special proteins and that they are decorated by what are called phosphate molecules. And it's these phosphate molecules that help bind calcium and phosphate and actually help form the casein micelle. And so if you don't have these phosphorylations on your casein, you can't bind calcium and phosphate, and hence you can't even begin to make a casein micelle. And this is technically very challenging to be able to produce, your strain to make not only caseins and not only very high titers, but also have these be functional and phosphorylated. And this is, again, something I've been working on for a very long time, which started in kind of the fundamental science area, and that we've been able to overcome. So step one, you need a strain to make phosphorylated casein. And then step two, you need to be able to make this very complex protein component called a casein micelle. Casein micelles are made in the mammary gland of all mammals, and it's a very tightly controlled process. And so you have to be able to try and replicate this outside of the mammary gland. And you have to be able to control the interactions between protein and calcium and phosphate at the right temperature, the right pH, get all of these components correct. And then you can get a casein micelle to assemble and for it to be native-like and actually be functional. And so once you've done all that, you then have to think about, well, how are we going to do this at mass scale? This is then the next challenge. We can do it on the bench, we can do it in very small volumes. How do we do it really efficiently? So a dairy industry, we can come and we can slot our process in and use the equipment that's already available. And so these are the really big three things that we've been able to overcome: the phosphorylation of the proteins, the formation of micelles, and then translating that process into an industrial process so that we can do this really quickly and at mass scale.
And how can this technology improve the nutritional profile of dairy without relying on animals?
As we build our casein micelles from the ground up, we can precisely control all of the components that are going into them. And so if you think about this, down in the southern hemisphere, and I guess in quite a few places around the world now, you can buy A2 milk. A2 is one genetic variant of one casein called beta casein. Every single protein in milk has multiple genetic variants, and they have all slightly different functionality. Some have different types of amino acids. And so we can choose exactly what we want to be able to create our micelles. And we can also design them in terms of size, how much calcium and phosphate and other minerals can go into them. And so we can really tailor the nutritional profile of our micelles. But if we again go back to that, thinking about, well, let's apply this this technology to human casing micelles. The industry can't go out and buy human casing micelles at the moment for obvious reasons. I mean, there are very select companies around the world selling breast milk, but this isn't really scalable and mass market for the likes of infant formula. And so this technology, you can truly replicate human nutrition through breast milk, recombinant breast milk proteins. And in that way, this is something that you just cannot do currently with animals. And so this would really take a leap forward in the next generation of human nutrition, particularly around infant nutrition.
Mhm. You spoke about the scale and size of the global dairy industry earlier, and that brings us to emissions. In what ways can your casein micelle technology help reduce the carbon footprint of the dairy sector?
Yeah, sure. If you think about the production process of traditional milk, you have to grow a baby cow for, 2 to 3 years until it's a lactating cow. So that whole time you're feeding a cow, you're looking after this cow, and it's producing nothing for you. So this current process is very inefficient when you really break it down into its components and what you're doing with the milk components. And another really good example is also, the production of lactoferrin. So you need about 10,000 liters of milk to produce 1 kilogram of lactoferrin, whereas we can do this, dramatically lower quantities in a shorter time using precision fermentation. And this goes towards caseins and casein micelles as well. In terms of life cycle analyses, Perfect Day, who is one of the older precision fermentation startup companies, they did a really comprehensive life cycle analysis on their whey protein, and they found 91 to 97% lower greenhouse gas emissions compared to traditional whey, 29 to 60% lower energy demand, and 96 to 99% lower blue water consumption. So these are really significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and the overall kind of production process compared to traditional whey protein. And whilst we haven't done a life cycle analysis ourselves on this protein, we can extend that, the thinking and that life cycle analysis to other dairy proteins, including caseins. And so if you think about, well, how could this potentially help the dairy industry? If the dairy industry, and we've had these conversations with some dairy industry players, you could look at starting to incorporate, maybe 5% precision fermented casein proteins and casein micelles into your current portfolio. And then as the infrastructure catches up and we are able to produce more and more caseins using this technology, you can start incorporating more and more precision fermented caseins into your portfolio. And then this would see a reduction in those overall greenhouse gas emissions. So I think it's a really important part of the future of the dairy industry is using these precision fermented casein proteins.
Thanks for your time today, Jared. Thanks for sharing your insights with Food Ingredients First.